Worship is considered a Christian discipline because it is a deliberate and ongoing practice that aligns our hearts and minds with God. And so just like all of the other things, like prayer, like fasting, like Bible study, worship requires intentionality and commitment. It is not only an emotional response. I heard 2 amens. I'm going to take that and go with it, right? It is not only an emotional response, but a discipline that shapes our faith and deepens our relationship with God. It is grounded in God's intentions for us. And God's intentions for us start Exodus chapter 20. Well, before that, but I'll start there and be here all day, right? So Exodus chapter 20, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. Why? For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, and you will worship me alone. In the New Testament, we have several scriptures. Here are the most common ones. Romans chapter 12. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. What I'm focusing on here is I urge you. I urge you to worship. I urge you to make this a part of your life. John chapter 4, yet a time is coming, and now come, when true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and His worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in truth. Must worship. I don't know if you're underlining or highlighting things, that would be the thing, Must worship. Take note. Hebrews chapter 13. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess His name. Highlight continually. Sacrifice, speaking of discipline again, right? So continually offer to God sacrifice of praise. Acts chapter 16 gives us this example of worship and praise. It says that about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Now, believe me, if you know that story, Paul and Silas there could have been doing, other things at this time. I mean, they could have been complaining. I know, I'm not going to say I probably would have been complaining, but anyways, that's one thing they could have been doing. They could have been very angry at this situation. They could have been thinking of kind of giving up. Okay, that's it. I try to do good for God, and I end up in prison, kind of give up, or at very least, to be anxious. What's going to happen next? And this is not what happens. What came naturally to them was worship. It was worship because it was a part of their everyday lives. Now, what I'd like to do before we finish today is to look at the life of David, because I think there is no greater illustration, no greater example of a person who lived a life of worship than David in the Bible. And during his childhood, I really picture him learning to play the harp and discovering it as a tool to worship God. In much the same way, that's why I brought my piano here, because I learned how to play the piano. And initially, I mean, it was just, I was young, I was 8 years old, I think I started. But it wasn't a tool to worship God. I discovered that. Oh, wait, you can do this with that, right? And I believe that's similar to what happened in David's life. I believe that even as a child, that some of the things that he wrote were with his lyre, were with his instrument, that he developed this sense of worship to God. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That one never gets old. Never gets old. In David's transition into adulthood, David continues to make worship a part of his life. And I don't know whether he was doing, you know how it is, teenagers becoming adults. It started out with odd jobs that he was doing for his dad. A lot of us do that. But then he got his big break. His big break, his first real big job. He's gonna work for the king. Can you imagine? That was quite a break. And so he starts working for the king of his country. And 1 Samuel chapter 18 says that David was playing the lyre as he usually did. In other words, in his transition into adulthood, there are things that he learned when he was a child that he brought with him into adulthood, and that's a really important step. But as he usually did, unfortunately, life wasn't always so quiet and innocent for David. He goes on to face many extreme challenges. 1 Samuel 30, when David and his men were living in Ziklag, the Amalekites came and attacked them. The passage says that they burned the village to the ground, taking the women and children captive. The passage says that his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. I mean, how do you get out of a situation like that and lead, right? And lead a group of men that he was supposed to be leading. And yet somehow David was able to turn to God in that moment. He remembered God's faithfulness. He remembered the goodness of God. He remembered his forgiveness. The passage tells us, by the way, all of this is discipline, the discipline of worship that kind of came to play in his life in that moment. 1 Samuel 30. But David found strength in the Lord his God. The Lord is my shepherd. He goes before me, defender behind me. I won't fear. I'm filled with his anointing, my cup overflowing. No weapon can harm me. I won't fear. There's also beautiful moments of joyful celebration and victory in David's life. When the Ark of the Covenant, representing the presence of God, is brought back to Israel. What a moment of great victory as the ark is carried into the city. 2 Samuel chapter 6 says this, wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of trumpets. Great moments of celebration. And there was also unthinkable distress, unthinkable sorrow when David's infant dies after a short struggle with sickness. You imagine from the highest high to the lowest low, David responds in this way. And this is right after the child, he hears that the child has died. 2 Samuel chapter 12. Then David got up from the ground. I guess he was on the ground. This is a low in his life, right? So David got up from the ground after he had washed, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. Isn't that beautiful? He worshiped. Then he went to his house, and at his request they served him food, and he ate. In other words, he picked himself up again through the discipline of worship. You remember when David had it in his heart to build a temple for the Lord? So an exciting time. It was so invigorating, full of God's purposes for his life. It was all coming to a climax right here with this plan to build the temple. And right in the middle of doing fundraiser, he was doing a huge fundraiser, all right? The whole country was involved with this. And this is the biggest project of his life. And when it says that this is what David said when he's seeing that God is providing for this project. This is what he says. This is, yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and on earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. You know, even at the point of death, when David hears that the fight for his throne is over and Solomon, his son, is safely crowned as the new king, this is what happens. 1 Kings chapter 1. And the king bowed in worship on his bed. So, like he's dying. This is the end. He's in palliative care. He says, and the king bowed in worship on his bed and said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has allowed my eyes to see a successor on my throne today." David's was a life of worship to God. Lord, make us into a people of worship. Into a people of worship. And you know that in Psalm 34, David invites us to worship. He does it often, but here in Psalm 34, it says, "I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I will glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name forever."